Good morning, everybody. Thank you for attending this session. My name is David Williams. I work in the office of the CTO for BMC Software. What I'd like to do today is talk about the cloud area. And most people, when they look at the cloud presentations, you're going to get a bit of motherhood and pie, you understand what the situation is. So I'm going to keep those sort of bits of content down to a minimum, because what I'd like to do is introduce some approaches that we at BMC have been looking at in regards to how we are delivering our technology, which is a little bit different than in other companies that I've worked for, where the software really defines where you start. We decided to take a slightly different approach and look at what problems we were trying to solve and provide our, anybody actually, not only our clients and prospects, but anybody that visits our website with material that could be used as a backbone to a strategy on cloud based upon what people are trying to do. So what we ended up doing was building some material that provides this sort of content. But initially it was really driven by a couple of things. One, we wanted to make sure that when cloud automation was put into the environment, that it was actually got value recognition. The biggest problem with automation generally, whether it's doing cloud or provisioning or password resets, is that it never gets accounted for. So when automation goes into an environment, it's pretty much taken for granted. So when someone comes to you and says, we want to build more automation, you've got to re-justify the automation, because the automation you've already deployed hasn't been telling you how valuable it is, because it's like breathing in and out at that stage. So as a company that spends a lot of time and effort working with automation technology, it was our point to make sure that our clients and prospects understood that we can provide some value from the automation we're providing. So the technology itself had to collect some statistics. And so what we did was we looked at the cloud environment specifically, and then we're about to announce a set of material that shows how the cloud environment can actually have value as well, and you can step into it in a more gradual way as opposed to a utopian ideal. But there's really a set of myths that exist in cloud, and you might have heard about them with the other presentations inside of Gartner over the last couple of days, about the businesses making their own decisions. This is a true decision. Companies are making their own decisions around this, but fundamentally IT operations is still instrumental in part of this decision. Developers use whatever they want. As an ex-developer, I can tell you that's a pretty true statement. If it's free, it's really good. And in tools and testing environments, developers will always use what they want, whether it's cloud or not. They will always use the technology that is applicable to development, and that is understandable. So developers use whatever they want, but now clouds are coming out, so they can choose to go to an Amazon instance or a Microsoft Azure infrastructure and choose to go there as opposed to going to the IT operations organization. And the other one that I think is a bit of a myth is that public clouds will dominate. And I think that what you're going to see is that the public cloud vendors are going to do everything they can to make that come to fruition. And that's not the first time. It's happened many times in the industry where domination seems to be the objective. But fundamentally, that means there's going to be an awful lot of compelling type of arguments on why people should look at the public infrastructure as opposed to investing in the private one. And this has bred an awful lot of uncertainty in IT operations about the future of IT operations. So what is going to happen to the IT operations environments when cloud decisions are made by the business and development organizations without involving necessarily IT operations? And what's going to happen when things like DevOps occur, when the development infrastructure is unified with the operations infrastructure and the decision is made at a completely different set of levels. So the corporate IT's role is uncertain. I think the uncertainty today is driving an awful lot of behaviors around how automation is deployed and how clouds are used. So how is this really going to change the corporate IT? People want different things from the cloud. And the first thing is that you've got to be able to provide something that's self-service, that provides people with what they want. So different cloud users are going to want different cloud types. Initially, cloud was all around adding a server. So it was all around, what do I need? Capacity. So that's what really cloud was about. I want to go out there and get some capacity to do some testing, some development, and it's only costing $10 a day, or in fact, even less. Now it's moving out and it's much more expansive. It's now stacked systems, it's databases that are integrated, it's the whole full stack of infrastructure, and that's where the services are really coming in. So it's no longer just capacity, it's now everything that anyone would ever want. And the users are going to be, they want a consistent user interface. This is not a broker, but it can be. It's something that says, I want to go to a mobile device and I get all the services that I need displayed on that device, and I can choose how I want that. How it's provisioned or how it's provided should be still masked from the end user. And that hasn't quite happened yet. They're still very much involved in what clouds are being used and what technology is being used behind the scenes. But fundamentally, the ambition is that this interface that is still being developed is going to be used to help people understand what services are available to them, and they just choose it like you would on a menu at a restaurant. And of course, the one thing that corporate IT is always accountable for, irrespective of how many people go out there and provision things in the cloud and put things out in the infrastructure, guess what? When it comes to compliance and security, that's IT operations problem. Even if they weren't involved in the decision, it's still going to go down to the IT operations organization. We're going to get the blame. And when problems occur, they're going to end up having to put it into their service management system and actually fault find and do things on areas that they never even understood. So I find that when I talk to customers, some of them are actually taken by surprise that the infrastructure that they're supporting is actually built from pieces of cloud environment that they weren't even involved in the decision for. Yet they are the one-stop shop. So everybody has to go to them. So this is the one motherhood and pie type of message, is why do people go to clouds? There are a whole bunch of reasons, but there is one particular one that's more than anything else. We'd like to think it's cost, but it's not really cost, it's speed. Speed seems to be the number one reason that people are going into the cloud. It's getting things faster with less grievance. And so speed is about faster delivery. I want a self-service interface, and it's where companies like Amazon would kick in, because fundamentally they give that environment. The second one is cost. I want to do it much cheaper, so optimizing the usage, and I want to basically pay for what I use. I don't want to pay for everything, I just want to pay for it when I use it. So the consumption-based model is really kicking into cloud, because if you don't use it, why are you paying for it? And that's starting to become a question, because the ones that offer it are being compared with the companies that do not offer it. But the one thing is risk is coming up in. It's coming up in quite a few conversations. Amazon have recently announced that they have a risk environment for the federal government. So even the federal government now has an option to go to a public cloud and start putting things out there that would never have been done before. So the public cloud environment is getting smarter around risk and the issues that if it's ignored, will create. So here's a short, and I'm sure there's a bolt of lightning coming and hit me now. We did a survey with a company called Forrester, and what we did was we went to a number of companies and asked, what are the reasons that you haven't been successful in deploying clouds? Because a lot of companies that are into clouds are on revision 2 or 3 of their cloud deployment. And there was a whole bunch of reasons. Systems integration was probably the biggest one, with 60% of people saying it was really difficult to integrate with everything I already had. So you have your cloud infrastructure sitting there, and you have to integrate it with everything else. So if you're looking at the private and public cloud infrastructures, believe it or not, they don't tally. So I used to be an analyst, and one of the questions I used to get a lot was, why don't the vendors work together? Why aren't they working together so everything's much easier? Well, that's never going to happen, I wouldn't believe. I don't think that Amazon and Microsoft are going to be holding hands any day soon. So it really is the idea that if you want to integrate between two public cloud environments, you're going to have to put something on top to bring it together and normalize it. And if you want to bring that together with your private environment, then you're going to have to build something else that actually does that too. So that is the main reason that integration was a major component point. The other one was there's no chargeback. I don't know if any of you go out to a place called GitHub, where there's an awful lot of stuff. People use it for document collection, scripting, applications development. If you go out there, the one thing that I found out there was an awful lot of applications or script engines that have actually been built that do chargeback for the public clouds. So they want to know how much they're using, because believe it or not, if I'm a public cloud provider, I want to sell you as much as I possibly can. And to tell you that you can save money by not using all this other stuff probably wouldn't be to my benefit. So they're actually building lots of systems behind the scenes. And this is a public area, GitHub, and you can go out there and find out exactly what people are doing. And it's really around costing and chargeback. It seems to be the majority of the issues here. So costing doesn't have to be, by the way, I'm going to pay for something. It can be just show me how much I would have to pay for it if I was paying for it. Just give me the value of that. And the final area is operational requirements. These are things like, I didn't understand how to do capacity across this whole thing. I didn't do the performance monitoring of the infrastructure. So very basic, what used to be called, and it's something I don't agree with personally, but it used to be called day 2 activities. You know, day 1, provision everything, day 2, monitor it. Now what's happening is that day 1, you put the monitoring in. It's like having a nuclear reactor. Day 1, build a nuclear reactor. Day 2, monitor it. That's not going to be a good approach. You want to put all that infrastructure into the cloud infrastructure immediately. And so these are the real reasons that clouds were really failing to kind of get adoption widely through the initial stages of the deployment. This is a bit about cloud complexity, and the reason I say this is because when we talk about clouds, we sort of like, I could say cloud, and I can go to each one of you and say, what do you think cloud is? And I would guarantee I get, I don't know, there's 50 people in the room, they could say 50 answers to what a cloud is, because it depends on where you are. I'd actually argue that if you ask analysts 50 times in one day, one analyst, you'll get 50 answers. It really depends on what you're actually looking at, how the cloud's going to give you. So what we actually looked at was really trying to define as a vendor what the cloud was. And so the cloud infrastructure was the very basic type of stuff, the platforms. So you go out there and get a server, you go out there and get some databases, you go out there and get some storage. That's the very basic one, the infrastructure. But now we've got the services. And what services are combinations of those things. So I want a database, I want a server, I want the middleware, I want the web environment, I want everything built up, and that's what a service is. So the services can be the specific components, or they can be a conglomeration of multiple components and support something much bigger. And then there's this thing called the multi-cloud. And some people call this hybrid. And what multi-cloud is multiple different types of clouds. It can be, you've got multiple public clouds, multiple private clouds, but you want to be able to manage it in a consistent way, but fundamentally you're looking at multiple clouds. What a hybrid cloud is slightly different. What a hybrid cloud is in this interpretation, so you can take it as it is, but basically it is the ability to say that I've got my databases in one infrastructure, I have my processing going to happen, I can burst out to somewhere else, and I'm using multiple clouds or multiple environments with which to do highly distributed infrastructure. So for example, I have an application that's sitting in my private environment, and I want to burst out and do some processing, which is much cheaper to do if I go out into the public. And suddenly I've got half an application sitting out in the public area doing some analysis or big data type of infrastructure. That's hybrid. It's when you've got distributed. Now, for those of you who've done cluster management, things like this, think about the complexity of automating an infrastructure that goes across a bursting environment that's in Amazon, a data infrastructure that sits in Azure, and you've got your private stuff that's being pulled in. Suddenly, from a management perspective, you've got to manage all those pieces and bring them together. So hybrid is going to cause quite a few problems going forward. I would honestly tell you it's not a decision of operations to do hybrid, it is an application decision. So the applications have to be developed to work this way. So operations can't do anything to influence this, but it's going to be dumped on operations pretty quickly when someone says, I've built this great application, and guess what? All the pieces are all over the map, because it makes more business sense to do it that way. So many years ago, we had, in operations, we had a whole bunch of people that when we used to say the server guys. It was never that simple. It was the Windows guys, it was the AIX guys, the HPUX guys, the VMS guys, the mainframe guys, and they didn't talk to each other because their system was better than the other systems. It was really quite an interesting environment, but it created lots of silos. And of course, you've got the normal silos, which is the networking organization, the service management teams, the security organizations, and they create silos. What's happening today is that as people are adopting clouds, guess what? The silos are still there, they're still occurring. You have a cloud group maybe, but they may have different responsibilities and different roles, and within each one of these areas, you're going to find disparity. So one vendor will do, one provider will provide you with some extremely good monitoring and provisioning, but not so much on the chargeback and even less on some of the configs. And then another one is very strong in configs and they don't use the same tools. So if you've got two of these guys, you're going to have two silos, two sets of experts managing those two areas. And of course it can get really complex if you want to add OpenStack into the whole thing or anything from VMware. And so you've really got to be able to look at this in a much more holistic way. This is the biggest challenge that people have. Now you've got to make a decision that says, I'm fine with this. We've worked for many years with an IBM mainframe infrastructure where that's its own group. And we have a really, a pretty neat group that does VMware management, and that does its own stuff. That's fine, as long as you remove the word hybrid from that. So as soon as hybrid comes in, guess what? You'll get all the areas blur, and suddenly these teams that have got their own bias start having to work together. And the hardest thing, one thing that will always break automation is people. And the whole point of automation is so you don't need the people, but fundamentally, that's never happened. In the whole history of operations, one myth is automation is going to make your job go away. It's never made anybody's job really go away. It's moved them into different jobs. And so, and automation itself requires, some administration and development. So fundamentally, no matter what you try to do this, you're going to end up with either groups of people in each silo, or you're going to make a decision to unify in some way by bringing these types of disparate environments together that has common request systems, common resources, common service levels, a normalization level that comes up and says, I can change whatever I want down here. The business can go out and find that there's an application that goes in a cloud that I haven't even considered before, and I can add it into this mix, but I want it to be to the point where I'm not having to retool the infrastructure and I'm not having to reskill the operations personnel that have to keep the thing alive and running. So you want to be able to do something that, in most cases, consistency is an extremely good asset to have. You want to have some sort of normalization. It used to be called manager of managers. Remember that one? This is the software industry. To make things less complex, we add something. And that's our nature. Because apparently if we add something, it makes everything that was more complex easier. So what it is fundamentally you want to be able to make things less complex by normalizing the data from all these infrastructures. So if you do have any weaknesses in one service provider area, you can actually supplement that, and you can also normalize the information that comes from the other providers. So if you want to add a service, you can say, I'm going to add you a service, but it's cost effective for me to add a service in one provider, and you shouldn't have to worry about yourself what I'm going to provision. I'm going to basically give that to you. So it helps you get down that path of sort of brokering and understanding, but fundamentally what this is purely the ability to do management. So you have a unified automation environment here because you're normalizing the information. You have integrated between your cloud activities. So you're talking about cloud management. You have a team that does cloud management, not a team that does individual silo cloud management. You can fill the functional gaps. You can do the leveraging the existing technology. So if you do bring in something new, you want to get the adapters and the APIs to integrate with the management disciplines that provider will provide. And again, expect the providers to constantly change this. They will basically put huge amounts of effort into making the management of their infrastructure robust. And that's always happened with platform providers of any description. IBM did it with, even in the old days, with a product called Smith. Anyone ever heard of that? Oh man, I'm the oldest person in the room. So basically what that was I'm going to provide you with free management. But the whole point was, I'm going to provide you with free management because I want you to buy my platform. And so that's really what it is. It's basically the ability to do this and normalize the information as it flows across the infrastructure. So what does this CMP really do? Why do people need a cloud management platform? Well, the things that it should provide, and this is a whole disparate, I've seen this on wish list items as well as when you look at what you want. So self-service, multi-cloud, you want the better compliance, elasticity. Everything on this plot is really what you want the CMP to provide. Workload replacement is probably the more forward-thinking thing. What that means is, if I have a workload running, I want to be able to move it from one environment to another that's more cost-effective. So it's almost like workload balancing across your cloud infrastructures. So what you want to be able to provide is, I'm going to be managing all these infrastructure pieces from a private cloud all the way through to the public clouds. But I also want to include my corporate data center because people forget that the corporate data center is not going away any day soon. So I want to be able to provide services that also include all the things I already provide that may not have that nice service information based upon it. But I want to be able to have applications and self-service portals, but I want corporate IT to be able to provision that and make sure that it has a consistent view of the overall environment. Now I've done the intro. So where does that leave? Where's the action on this? We looked at this environment and said, those slides wouldn't have been anything more than information. And it's fine, I could talk about all the problems of cloud management and the possible future and the impact of OpenStack and these sort of things. We had to look at what people were going to do in this infrastructure. So what did you want to do? So we actually went out and spoke to a lot of companies about forget the technology, forget that BMC is a software company, just tell us what it is you want to do. So we built a set of material that we ended up calling the passport. And what it did was, it defined three things. It defined the process that needs to be completed to do the automation. But it involved two other areas. It had obviously added the technology to support those processes, but the area that we, as a software company, that rarely gets incorporated is the organization that needed to be put into place to support it. So I can give you the best software on the world. I can say, this will solve your problems. And I walk away going, this is a good deal. And you'll come back to me and say, it's on the shelf, we haven't used it. I go, well, why? It's because the 4 people that ended up having to buy into the whole point, 3 of them didn't get on. And so organizationally it broke it. People weren't ready to digest it. It became something that wasn't adopted by all the people that needed to adopt it to give you that holistic environment. So as a company, we had to look at what organization, have a discussion that says, we've got this technology that can do this, is where we come from. So how can we fit it in? We went from that approach to, here's the process that we're trying to address here. This is the automation that you can put in, and this is the organization that we would recommend you have based upon a best practice and working with many other companies that have automation. So it really built upon 3 areas. The first one was the automation value model. If I give you automation, you've got to be able to measure the value. That's the first thing. Automation assumes that you already understand that. And no, very few companies do. The next thing is I wanted to give you some guidelines, some guidance on if you implement this technology, there's got to be some sort of map that I can give you, a starting point. So instead of just giving you software and saying, go for it and give you services, etc. I can actually give you a process map that you can say, well, we use this stuff from this company and we use this open source pieces and we're going to script here and you've got this. How does that all fit together? So it's really a process map of you are here. And then lastly, we wanted to make sure that we can help companies get training on this sort of stuff. So we thought, okay, if we understand the best practices and the technology, whether it's BMC or not, and again, this is the difference. We actually looked at this without having the software guiding our thoughts around process. We just looked at what it was. How do we help companies get to a point where they can say, what is this new thing called the automation architect, which people are starting to talk about? In fact, I've actually met quite a few automation architects. Once upon a time, if you'd have found one on LinkedIn, you would have had to get their autograph because they were pretty unique. But now they're starting to come out. These are people who are responsible for the process, designing it, developing it, and owning it. And automation has always failed in operations because no one's really owned it. They've owned the provisioning piece, but if you try to string it all together, who owns all those holes? And so the automation architect is stepping up, and sometimes they're called the solutions manager, but fundamentally, the architect is the person behind the scenes that says, this is what the business needs, this is the process I have, this is how the technology maps. And so we had to, we looked at providing some training on accreditation of automation architects. So what it really boils down to is a document that's now available on the BMC website, and it gets constantly updated. At the moment, it has very specific attributes to it in regards to use cases, but it has lessons learned from customers, good ones and bad ones. So this is what people did, and this is why they failed. This is what they did, and this is why they succeeded. So it has a lot of that built in. It has implementation recommendations, what you need to do, and this is what people have tried before. And so again, that's really much a guiding line. Providing a prescriptive process. Now the process map is everything from what the activity does, the automation does. It's not technology, it's purely this happens and this happens, and I can give you examples of what we've done with cloud. The value metrics. This was probably the hardest job that we had to do. I'm assuming that when we put this together, we actually did it in levels, which I'll explain. But each level has its own value metrics. So as you get to if you say that you want to start off at a lower level, you understand what value it provides. So you can say, I'm collecting these metrics, and the metrics are like math. They're not like, it's going to make you more efficient. And if you buy more from us, we're going to make you even more efficient. That wasn't a good metric. In fact, it's not even a metric. So we had to provide calculations that showed people how to move from a patching environment up to a provisioning infrastructure, and then move forward and actually calculate the value that automation was providing to either show value to the business or help justify the investment of further automation. And then there was the justification of benefits, which is why you do the automation, the use cases, and what you expect to get from that, tied to the metrics. The required technology, and this is a type of technology. So say to do this, you need this type of technology to actually do that process. And using the map, you can actually say, if I have a process map that says this is what I want to do, that's how you would then evaluate products. So instead of the product coming up on your doorstep and you're trying to work out, how do I get this product to do what I want it to do, even though I'm not quite sure what it is on that big picture thing. Now what you're doing is you're getting the process, you're moving it around and saying, this is how the technology should map to that process. So suddenly the integrations become clearer, the definition of how many products you need becomes clearer. So for us, one thing that within BMC, when we built this material, is the most interesting conversation I had was with the general manager who was fully endorsing this, but with the development team. Because we built this process map and they go, well, we don't do that. Was that there's your problem, because that's what companies want to do. They want to link this to that. They want to have this provisioned in that way. They want, by the way, patching isn't done. Anybody that thinks patching's done? Ooh. So we discovered that even the rudimentary things like patching weren't done, and we had to provide some real understanding about things are just not ready to be patched. In some cases, as low as 10% successful patching was happening. So, it was really the process that was driving our thinking around how our products now need to be developed. So we stopped thinking about features and functions and adding more and more widgets to our technology and started thinking about the problem we're trying to solve using the application process maps. And of course, there's a required roles. What sort of people change? Because when you tap automation, I remember being in a deal, it wasn't with BMC, a previous employer, where I went into the account, and it was a bank in London. And the justification for the database automation was based upon the removal of 15 people from the process. 15 people, they had 25 people in total, and they said, we can get rid of 15. Get rid of 15 people, we can do this product. Then you can use the 10 you have remaining to administer it. So those 15 people didn't leave, they all moved to different jobs within the IT infrastructure, but those 10 people that remained in databases did it for a year. I then went in with the sales guy later, and we said, we'd like to sell you more. Now, if I look at that initial thing of 15 people, you only have 10 left. So what do I now tell him? Yes, I'll employ 5 people, and then we can justify getting rid of those, and then he has no people to get more technology in. It was just a flawed analogy. So what I'm saying to you is that the value that it provides and the roles that were being defined needed to be really done. So the value needed to be much more than just removal of headcount. It needed to be much more around the value that the technology provided that enabled those 10 people to be much more efficient and to actually provide greater value or do things faster or at lower cost. It had to be those metrics. It couldn't be just removal of people, which is, by the way, in operations has always been the use of automation. I automate, I only have to have one guy and a dog doing it, and if the guy presses the button, the dog bites and comes up. So, it's really that type of infrastructure. And so what we did was we built this material that's on that web, and I can make this available, but if you go to the BMC website, you'll see it's an open download. I don't even ask for your name. You can just go there and take it. I find that when you ask people just for the basics, like their email, it's like, ooh, that sounds like a trap. So we're deciding that people are going to make it open and say, you can use this. So no matter what you're using, at least you can get value from this, irrespective of whether you want to come to BMC. But by reading it, you'll understand where BMC is going as a company in regards to its development and its strategy. So the environment is this. So when you look at the passport, it actually does into certain things. Very Gartnerish. So once you join Gartner, apparently it takes some sort of very painful surgery to get that out of you. So I went back to my roots a bit, and I looked at the model. And the model was really built upon the fact that you go from an ad hoc, which some people used to call chaos. I wasn't allowed to call it chaos because I could just say to you, anybody in chaos? No. So basically, anybody using ad hoc technology is a much more digestible sort of thing. But a lot of people are living down in we're living in the ad hoc area. That's where a lot of the DevOps stuff is today. Lots and lots of technology doing lots and lots of pieces of the pie. And then the tools area where BMC came in. And then process, standardization, and advanced. And advanced is always a very advanced state. It's a higher state, obviously, than sometimes most companies are ready to digest. But fundamentally, each one of those steps has got value attached to it. So if you were doing cloud, and you were going from image to manage, from the tools area to manage, you would have a set of values at image that you could measure, a process that defined what image it was, And then you get to manage. You can say, that's the value I'm going to get. This is the calculations I'm going to use to get to that next level. And so each one of these levels, on each different type of use case here, cloud, compliance, and provisioning, has its own specific value sets. So as you move up, you've got different processes, roles may change, value enhancements happen. So it's used like a foundation. So this is the highest level overview. Of course, as you move into one area, and this is cloud, there's got to be certain things that that thing does. To get the value out of it, it does specific things. So for cloud, at the lowest level, it creates, it configures, it packages, it deploys, and it installs. That's what that cloud process does. At the managed level, it does a lot more. It consolidates, it does cataloging, orchestration, and goes further up. So change, verify, integrate, and monitor. So as you go further up, you can see the value is actually being enhanced by certain things, attributes being added to that process. And that doesn't mean you've got to buy a whole bunch of new tools. That just means you could be using the technology, and as you start enhancing it and using it more fully, you get some of these advantages. So this is not products. This is the process, and it gets more sophisticated, more rounded as you get more into the cloud infrastructure. So it was brought down to a point where as you go to optimize at the highest level, analyze, you want a broker, you want to align costs. Align costs for an IT organization is quite a complex thing to do, because it means you're tying the usage of your cloud, maybe your private and your public cloud environment, into your financial systems. And nothing will tax an organization more than talking to your financial organization about tying in operational metrics back into the back end. So that's why it's a very high advanced state. And most companies want to do show back. I'll tell you how much I'm saving you, but I won't actually charge you for it. So as you go up these levels, you get more sophisticated and the value therefore grows. This is, and now I'm going to make everybody's, and this is, I'm not going to ask anybody to read the dots. I'm just going to explain that this is how it works. This is how each level looks. So the first level is image, on the tools level 1. And you'll see that at the bottom, there are 3 arrows. The middle arrow is the bit that you execute, the bit that runs. It's the bit that I would sell you. It's the bit that does all the fast work. The pre-execution tasks are the things that you would do for that to occur. So I can say, I can automatically provision you a server, but I haven't told you you've got to go through the justification process, you've got to open a change request ticket, you've got to do all these other things that might take you 3 weeks. And what we found out was this, is that as you move through this process, you could spend an awful lot of time doing the pre-execution tasks of the automation process. You get down to the automation execution, and you can say, we've just reduced your provisioning from 5 days to 2 minutes. They go, great, that's incredibly good. He said, but your pre-execution task, which takes you 3 months, is still 3 months. So now you've gone from 3 months and a week to 3 months. You're not going to get any merit for that. Operations people don't get kudos for taking a little bit of pain out. It's you've taken the pain out where the biggest pain exists. So what we did was, when we found out how to do the process mapping, is that there are things that you do after the mapping and things that you do before it, and then you do the automation. And as you grow in your process, what happens is you've got to show the value. So this is the higher level values. These aren't the calculations. But fundamentally, as you go through the objective, this is what we want to achieve. These are the IT objectives, and then you get to the business value. So you can say, this is what IT is going to get from implementing level 1 cloud, and this is what the business is going to realize from me implementing level 1 cloud. And it's based upon these calculations that I'm measuring against it. And then you get more complex. This is the process. Don't forget, these are not products, this is what you do. So it's talking about configuration here. It talks about, I want to get the service orchestration pieces in. These are the very specific things. So everything in orange is new to this level. But you can see one thing has happened. The automation execution is broadening. So you'll be able to integrate more. You can do more things automatically. Your pre-execution is getting smaller. So your ability to actually get your cloud infrastructure managed more effectively is actually being broadened out by the fact that your processes are being supported by technology and the people that support it. And again, I'm going to go through a lot of these things. And if you want, by the way, if anybody wants copies of this, I can direct them to where they can get them, so you don't have to start looking at what your phone had on print on it. I can actually make this available to you. But these are all the objectives. So level 2 goes up. You can see level 3 with the govern process, more things get added. Now governance comes in. Workload type allocation information comes in. Configuration management comes in. So when you've got to this level, you're going to be looking for the technology that provides you with that capabilities. And here's where I'm going. When you start, most people start at the first level and then they work out what they need to do at the next level. That approach in cloud or any automation is going to be fraught with some challenges. So the idea is to go for a level that's way higher than you are and work your way back. Because you want to make sure that when eventually you're ready to do the automation and you want to integrate with your processes, that even though you may be at level 1, you may be thinking at this level. So when you make your decisions, it's really based upon getting to here. So even though the technology you're using may be a little bit more, you can actually make better decisions around scripting and in internal development and automation technology if you have where you're going in the future, at least in the back of your mind. Otherwise, the last thing you want to do with cloud is just drop it again. So I've started with cloud, I've done all that stuff, back to my original reasons for people not working with it. They didn't think of integration here. This is where the integration works. You've got to work out where your service catalogs are. Because if you want to offer services, you've got to have a catalog. So all these types of things that are built in, again, got the automation, the best practices, the IT objective, the business value, and of course, utopian highest level, which goes back to those metrics that I mentioned earlier on, about brokering, etc. This is the highest level. So at this level, your automation has got the maximum impact, the minimum on the pre-execution task, the maximum on the execution, and with some pre-execution activities happening in relation to it. Does that make sense? This is something that we had to really think about. By the way, as a company, we looked at this, and our products now map to this. And so we know where the gaps are better than anybody else now. We know what we can't do. As a software company, you never know what you can't do until you guys tell us. Well, we know what we can't do. So we will show you the mapping and show you where we're going with the technology. But if you have that, at least you can see. Then we come to the tricky one of organization and people. So we, as I mentioned before, we actually help people understand automation architects and what that means to people. But to bring it down to a level, this is what people start with in automation. You've got cloud administration, you've got software development and application test people, all involved at various levels, from being an enablement person, an operations person, or a beneficiary. But as you move through the levels, people move. So what I'm saying to you is as you move through this, people's roles and responsibilities will change, and more people get involved in the decision process. So as your processes get more sophisticated, the more people will want to get involved in making decisions. So this is something very useful when we put it in, because we now know who we talk to, and we can also help our clients and prospects understand this is what we see happening in automation to make it successful. These are where we see the roles going. This is where people are going to start contributing. And there's an awful lot of contributors. So the enablement people are the people that basically make it happen, but are fundamentally not operational. And you can see at the top, at the highest level, that operations people stop becoming the script writers and stop becoming tamperers and end up being the people that execute it and enable it, but fundamentally don't actually end up doing the writing. That is for the automation specialists and the development. So I've talked about the process, the benefits, the people, and of course now I'm going to get to the technology. So as you go up through this, there are technology components that you would put in. Now some of these pieces could be a combination of multiple products or be one product. But as you go up, you'll see that it enhancing them. So capacity management, something that we at BMC have been working on a lot recently. In fact, we've got a new version of our capacity tool coming out, which has OpenStack now as part of its overall capacity, so you can do much more broader capacity on this in regards to all the different cloud infrastructure you've got. You want to be able to manage that in a very holistic way. So it's actually influencing how people think about stuff, and then eventually you've got the cost management, which is probably most sophisticated. So you'll say, how did your process, which extended, only have one new thing added? Well, the reason is that some of the technology that's adopted just gets used better, integrated better. So fundamentally, this is where the tools come in that map back to the process that influences everybody else's roles and responsibilities. And of course, there's one thing that we add in. As you evolve into your cloud infrastructure, things change. Performance monitoring, performance, availability, and capacity in particular are the eyes and ears of cloud. And I'll explain exactly what that means. So at the initial level, cloud infrastructure is situation normal. Everybody knows what capacity does at the infrastructure level, at that level. Availability is red, green, yellow is normal. As it gets into the service, it's got to have an understanding about how things relate to each other. With things like Docker coming out, containers, that's all built in, so you monitor that infrastructure. Then you go up into the multi-cloud. Obviously, you want to be able to be more holistic. You've got a heterogeneous support across all these things. And then you get into the cross-cloud monitoring. At the highest level, the hybrid clouds, you've got to have technology that can actually work out that all the pieces are not in one infrastructure. They're across multiple infrastructures. So performance, availability, and capacity are extremely important. Capacity from how you allocate workloads, performance and availability to make sure that you're not messing around with too many people's heads. But how it works is this. At the lowest level, this is where most people sit. They monitor the infrastructure. As you get higher in your cloud deployment, your users will actually start using multiple clouds, and you're starting to say, okay, I'm now going from my cloud and monitoring the individual people. The transactions, synthetic transactions, etc. would work at that level, and the back-end infrastructure would be monitored. However, at the highest level, that is not going to scale. So you have to have technology that starts looking at it from the end-user perspective, that says, that person may be using multiple clouds, some that I manage, some that I don't. But if they complain about something because they're using their iPad for Grand Central Station, I need to understand that. So now I'm monitoring the person and working out what cloud service is going to be impacted. So I've gone from infrastructure monitoring and performance management through to application transaction and response time, all the way through to end user monitoring. And only at the end user monitoring will you get the full picture, because if you start doing agile releases, that person there is going to want to be impacted first. And by the way, their opinion is going to be what is going to be how can I say this? Their opinion is what their business thinks of IT. So if they think things suck, that's what they're going to say. No matter how many 99.9% uptimes you give them, they're having a bad time. So monitoring the end user will give you information about all your clouds, even if it's not your own cloud. And so the idea really is for a service broker to come up. And a lot of companies are looking at, okay, how do we manage all this thing? So the CMP is the first level of brokerage. It's not the holistic broker, but basically enables you to be able to say, as things get added, I should be able to manage all my infrastructure, my cloud environments, no matter where they come from, using APIs and tools, as well as my internal infrastructure. That's basically what it is. A CMP should be able to provide you that. And a CMP, don't forget, in that process model, is that middle ground. Your CMP could be really expansive. It doesn't have to be one lump of code. It could be some monitoring tools that integrate closely. So CMP could be multiple products that just happen to work very closely together, sitting on a platform somewhere. So it's not one, I would argue that it's not going to be one vendor. And at BMC we understand that you have a lot of other stuff there. And so that process is going to be mapped back to what you're using. And not to negate this, but when you're moving into the bimodal approach, you want to make sure that what you're using for the future can be leveraged by what happened in the past, irrespective of having two groups of people looking at future and past. So this approach is really that central island is not a product, it's orchestration, integration, and the consolidation of the data supporting that process model. And at BMC we've got, just to give you an understanding about what we have, at the end of the day, what we can show with the passport is that a lot of our technologies do map to the passport. Not everything maps, because we're still enhancing our technology to meet these passports. It's a brand new environment. But fundamentally, at the bottom, we have the Blade Logic automation suite, which is the provisioning, the compliance, and brings you in at the lower level of automation, more of the data center. But if you want to move forward to the cloud, you can build upon that infrastructure into the cloud environment. And then, of course, you've got that beautiful DevOps infrastructure that's about to come in, where you want the orchestration across the DevOps teams that are operations and development combined. And that's how our products really map at a very holistic way to the cloud services, compliance, and provisioning. So this is our recommendation. Again, I'm sorry, I wasn't on this side to put this thing in. I feel obliged that I've got to leave something. So I would say that the idea of a strategic approach, if you're using this process maps, you can move them around and say, that's not quite right, we don't do it that way, but we need to move it around. You can actually use it like Lego and building blocks. You can say, I want to move things. But you can use that strategic approach that says, we're going to this location, and this is how we can build our technology, and this is what the value we're realizing today. Also the protection of the infrastructure from the people that will do nasty things to it in regards to misconfigurations, etc. That must be put in, because only you are going to be responsible for managing the configs and security. And then enable the user access with easy point of easy to use portals. Within BMC, we have a technology called MyIT, which is becoming very much that user environment, that user-driven interface that people are using for service reporting, service management, collaboration, but also service requests. And then drive the cost out with using a CMP. I still believe that CMP is the way to go, purely because if a CMP doesn't exist, you're going to have a massive amount of silos. And every time someone comes up with a new cloud infrastructure, guess what? A whole new set of people, a whole new set of work practices, a whole new set of tools. And lastly, this is a step towards being a full digital service broker. This is one component of that. It's not a digital service broker, it's more than this, but fundamentally you've got to be able to provision and allocate services using a consistent interface of the use cases. And that, ladies and gentlemen, because I know your lunch is just over there, is my conversation for today. Thank you for attending.